Hey everyone, it's great to see you all again. There is one thing that I have struggled with since I started photography, and I've seen a bunch of beginner photographers struggle with as well. One that could really transform your good photos into great ones. So today I'm going to take you through how I edited this photo from Secret Beach on the southern Oregon coast. I'll take you through start to finish on how I edited this photo, and then give you a couple of techniques of how I took this photo from this to this. I hope you all enjoy. So here is the raw file, and I brought this into Photoshop to use Camera Raw, but this is going to be the same kind of technique that you can use in Lightroom as well. So this is a vertical panorama, and then I cropped it and straightened the horizon, and that is the first thing I always do. So let's create a new layer, and then go to Camera Raw. So this is going to look very similar, pretty much the same as Lightroom, and like I said, this is all going to basically be the same. So now as we bring this into Camera Raw, you can see that this is more of a blue hour after sunset photo, where I was really hoping some of that light was going to peek through underneath the clouds down here, and it didn't. However, we can really exaggerate that and bring that out here in post. And one thing that we're going to want to do is that we're going to want to make sure that people's eye goes straight to the center point where I want them to go. Now it'd be great if there was a little person here as like a main subject, but this tree right here is going to act as our subject for this image. So we're going to want to make sure, our goal is to make sure that the first thing that you see when you look at this image is this tree and the rock. So we're going to exaggerate some of this light, and we're going to vignette a little bit, darken down the sky, exaggerate that sunset after sunset glow, and then clean a couple of things up. So that's the first thing I want to do, is kind of make a plan and visualize how I want the image to look before I even start the edit. So let's start with the exposure. I'll take the exposure up a little bit, but I don't want to take it too far up because of that sky. Don't touch the contrast, just do a couple basic adjustments, bring down the highlights, bring up the shadows, bring back some of that shadow detail. And a lot of what you're going to see is actually going to be in the masking section, and we'll get to that a little bit later. So we'll warm this up just a little bit, because it is pretty cool, and we want to make sure it's more of a sunset, post-sunset image. So I am going to warm it up. You can see there's a little bit of glow in the sky there, but again, we're just going to try to exaggerate that yellow warm glow. Bring up the vibrance by a little bit, bring down the saturation, just kind of flying through these basic edits because it's going to be pretty much the same from most of the photos I do. I'll bring up the texture, bring down the clarity, bring down the dehaze to kind of soften and fade the image a little bit. And we'll add a simple little S-curve just to bring back some contrast, lift the shadows to give a little bit of that fade. As you can see in the blacks there, what we're doing gives more of that painterly, less digital look when you use that. So here's just before and after of the tone curve. As you can see, it added a little bit of contrast. Might want to bring that tail end down a little. Not going to mess with the HSL slider quite yet, but I am going to come down to the color grading section, and this is going to be a really important part of this edit. Because that sunset glow isn't very exaggerated, we can really bring some of those colors out and manipulate the midtones and highlights to make it more of a warmer color to get that more sunrise glow. So what we're going to do is come to the midtones, crank up the saturation, and just kind of play around with what color I want my midtones to be. So for this sunset photo, I want them to be more orange, and then we're just going to take that down to just a couple points on the saturation. You can see the hue, saturation, and luminance, and I just like to be on the global section here, and then we're just going to bring it up by just a little bit, maybe around 11 or 10. You can see just touched the midtones there, just a little bit warmer. And then we're going to do it the same with the highlights. We're going to make the highlight color a little bit lighter than that midtone color, kind of exaggerate that sunset glow a little bit. So you can see what we did here. Just basic adjustments, really trying to bring out the warmth in the sky there. And I think I went a little bit too much on the highlights there. And then we might add some very subtle dark blue cool tones to the shadows to create that nice contrast there. So just the color grading section went from that to that to that, just bringing a little bit of warmth into the image. Bring a little bit of saturation into the calibration section. And if you want to learn a little bit more in depth of how the calibration section really works, I do have another video going in depth on that topic. But this is our basic adjustments. So if we do before and after, we really just neutralize the image to a point where we can select different parts of it and only affect what we want to affect. So really there's not much done here other than lightening it up, changing the colors just a little bit, but most of my editing is actually done in the masking menu. So we're going to come down here. I'm going to grab a linear gradient. I'm going to bring it down from the top to kind of create this vignette effect. And we're going to bring the exposure down by quite a bit. You can see what that's doing. It's bringing that texture back in the sky, but it's also bringing those nice dark blue tones back to that upper sky part that wouldn't be affected by the warm tones of the sunset yet. So we'll bring up the contrast just a little bit. And then I'm going to create another linear gradient and bring it down not as much. I'm just holding shift so it stays straight, and bringing it down not as much, and then darken that down a little bit more. And that's gonna you can already see how that's bringing your eye more towards the center of the image and bringing that nice texture back into the sky. So the next thing we want to do is I kind of want to continue on that vignette effect that we're trying to make. And I'm going to bring up the contrast and down the exposure of the foreground here. So again, you can already tell that just those two masks in general, sandwiching the darkness of the image, is already bringing your eye more towards the center than it already was. So here's before and after, already that beautiful texture in the sky. So now this is where it gets a lot of fun in the affecting the sunlight glow. So this is a technique that's very popular. It's done all of the time. But essentially you want to bring out a radial gradient where the sunset is shining. Maybe bring it this far into the image because you can kind of see the light down here, kind of see the light on that rock, and then feather it all of the way. 100% feather, so it's just a super soft radial gradient. Maybe smush it down a little bit. And then what we're going to do is we're going to come down to the dehaze slider and we're going to bring down the dehaze. See how it's kind of bringing that glow, kind of like a glow into the right side of the screen? You can kind of see it if I crank it up here. It's a nice faded glow. We're going to bring down the dehaze and then we're going to bring up the temperature. And you can see, maybe down a little bit, that's bringing a nice sunset kind of glow to the right hand side of the image. Now, because we're mixing that warm color into that blue cyan type of background, this isn't the color of warmth that I necessarily want. So we can manipulate that a little bit. It's a little bit on the green side, a little bit, it doesn't look like a natural sunset glow. So we might add a little bit of pink in there, but then I'm going to come back to the color mixer section and we're going to go to the hue tab, and then we're going to come down to the yellows and we're going to drag that towards the oranges just a little bit. You can kind of see if I crank it there, kind of see what it's doing down in the right hand side of the image. And we're just going to manipulate the yellows and oranges to try to make sure we get that red sunset glow rather than the green cyan that it's giving us. So it's a little bit better there. We can come back here, maybe add a bit of warmth, kind of crank it to see what it does there. Might be a little much, and maybe a little bit of saturation. But you can already see with these masks, we're manipulating the light and essentially bringing in details back to the image that we didn't have before, and then exaggerating that nice sunset glow in the right side of this photo. So the next thing we want to do is again trying to bring attention to where we want attention in the image. We'll grab another radial gradient and we're going to drag it over the area that we want the viewer to see, which for me in this case, it's kind of right in the center. It's where this tree is, where this rock is. Pretty high feather, maybe not 100. We're going to put that where we want it, and then we're going to raise the exposure by just a little bit. Just a little bit of exposure, maybe a little bit of warmth, and then a little bit of texture, and then minus a little tiny bit of DAs. This is a very, very minor adjustment, but if we do a before, after of just that minor adjustment, instantly brings your eye more towards the center of the image. You can see there's before and after, before and after. Again, gonna mess with the colors a little bit later because it's a little bit cyan. The yellows aren't doing what I want them to do, so we're gonna mess with that a little bit later, but for now we're just focused on getting the viewer to see what we want them to see. So again, here's a before and after of what we did there. So let's go back to the calibration section here, and this is where you can really start messing with what you want your colors to look like. So I'm just dragging the sliders back and forth. See, maybe a little bit of positive red. For my Sony camera, the green section, the green primary is one that I usually mess with a little bit the most. However, for this, since there's a lot of blue tones, I might want to mess with this one a little bit more. So I do want to see how that's a little bit more turquoise and orange. I want more of that kind of look for the sunset glow. So we might drag that a little bit negative and then come up to the hue section and then bring the aquas a little bit more towards, let's see, a little bit more towards blue, and then go to saturation. Might bring the saturation down a little bit of the aquas and a little bit of the blues. So we're kind of balancing everything out. Up on the oranges, up on the yellows. Go back to the hues and just kind of play around with the colors to get them to where you want them to be. I might actually bring the blues a little bit more towards purple and bring the oranges back a little bit more here. And we might go down and reset this calibration a little bit, bring it more towards the purple. Reset this one. Again, just drag these back and forth and experiment a little bit. So here is a before and after, before and after. And let's come back and do at least one more mask here. I'm going to do a vignette. So this is going to be a pretty soft but really big vignette. So we're going to bring a big radial gradient throughout the entire image here. We're going to invert it and maybe feather it a little bit less. And then what we're going to do is bring down that exposure to create kind of a custom vignette, because we can affect more of the sky if we want there, affect more of the foreground, put it kind of right there. And we're just going to go back and adjust some of these masks to get them where we want them. So bring that up a little bit and maybe warm this middle section up a little bit more. And then I might come up to this linear gradient and bring it down just a little bit to affect the sky a little bit more. And then one really important thing is that when you think you're all done, go and change the background color. And you can see on a white background, this might look a little bit dark. So maybe we want to bring up that exposure just a little bit, maybe bring up the shadows and the blacks, and then go on a black background and see what it looks like as well. So now it looks a little bit more faded, but that is before and that is after. And the last step we're going to do, you can do this either in normal Photoshop or in Lightroom, is to do a little bit of dodging and burning. So I'll take a brush tool or a radial gradient, however you'd like to do it. And essentially what I want to do is brush over some spots that I want to light up. So we're going to dodge first. I'm going to bring up the whites and then bring up the temperature and just brush over these spots that I want a little bit brighter to stand out a little bit more. So not being incredibly precise with this, because instead of bringing up the exposure for dodging and burning, we brought up the whites. So it's only going to bring up the brighter parts of what we're brushing. So you can see what we've done there, just a tiny bit of change. Maybe even bring up the whites a little bit more. You can kind of see what that's affecting. It's just affecting those whites, even if we bring it all the way up, just affecting the whites. And that's before, after, before, after. So subtle. I might exaggerate it so you can see more on screen. And then we're going to do the opposite for the darker parts. So we're going to bring down the exposure, another brush tool or radial gradient. We're going to brush over some of the parts we want less notice, and you can go in super detail here. I'm going to do a quick for the video. For this video, just a quick brush over of the darker parts. And essentially with this technique, you want to just follow the light. So you see how this was a bright part, and this was bright. This was all getting hit by the sunlight there. That's what we want to brighten up. And then the shadowy parts is what we want to darken down. And it just creates that nice natural light contrast. So there's before and after. And again, take a break from this photo for a little bit, come back in 15 to 30 minutes, and you're probably going to have a different view of what you saw before. So this is what my edit was now. Let's go back to the final edit, and it looks a little bit different. And even for this one, I'd probably darken this down just a little bit in the midsection there. I might darken this down just a little bit. But essentially, you just want to go through. Your edit might be a little bit different every time you do it. Just take a little bit of a break from the image, come back, see how you like it, re-edit it, make a few tweaks, and save it for when you are ready. And then try different backgrounds on white, on black, on gray, however you're going to display your image. And as you can see, what we've done is bring attention to the center of this photo. So here's the before, maybe towards the sky. Over here you can see up in the sky is kind of bright, down here is dark. Here you can see a little bit of light casting, but you can't really tell what's going on here. Here is the after, and your eye just instantly goes to this tree and the rock, and the sunlight is really exaggerated, and the sunlight is clearly coming from the right hand side. So here is the before and the after. So I hope you all learned something from this week's video. If you didn't already know, I started a Discord server for the entire community to come together, share photos, and give feedback. And then at the end of every month, I'll be selecting one of your photos as a monthly contest winner. Other than that, if you could subscribe to my newsletter for all sorts of future updates, and then for vlog and other video updates, if you could like and follow my Facebook page. Other than that, thank you all so much for watching, and I will see you in the next one.